Good morning and welcome to Vision in Action Live. Today we have a presentation. We're going to talk about change, and we also have a discussion with Michelle Dickinson. She's a resilience visionary and workplace coach, also a TED speaker and the author of the book Breaking Into My Life, Growing Up with a Bipolar Parent and My Battle to Reclaim Myself. Welcome, Mrs. Dickinson. I'm Jim Boswell. I'm your host and the author of Lifelong Fulfillment, Take Charge of Your Life. So let's look at the concept that change is constant. Once upon a time back in 1980, Mount St. Helens erupted in Washington state. John Lennon was shot and killed, and Ronald Reagan was elected president. The United States boycotted the 1980 Olympics in Moscow that year. Back then, a new house cost around $69,000. Income in the United States was about $19,200. A gallon of gas, $1.19. An average new car, $7,210. Pac-Man was released. Amiga 500 color computer cost $849 at that point. And for the remaining part of the 80s, we saw MTV, AIDS, internet, IBM PCs, mobile phones, global warming, the advent of Sandra Day O'Connor onto the Supreme Court, and the collapse of communism. Thank you to the people's history for all of that. So let's look at what it's like now, 40 years later. So by 2020, after a couple of generations, things aren't even remotely similar. MTV is defunct, AIDS is under control, PC tablets and phones are literally everywhere and with everyone. An average car price these days is $45,000. That's a 624% increase, when if inflation alone, it should only be a 400% increase. An average house now runs $389,000, which is a 566% increase over 1980. So if you look at that and look at inflation, you might say that a house ought to cost about $274,000 or so. That would be appropriate, but it's $389,000. Well, inflation alone doesn't account for that extra price. So maybe there's some irrational exuberance going on. Anyway, what this is designed to show you is that things do change. It's pretty constant. And that for those of us who would like it not to, it's a challenge, certainly. The other part of change is that if these kinds of trends continue into the future, some we can anticipate and some we can't. But things like inflation, the need for education, employment situations, income, and so forth are all critical to your success in a changing environment. So welcome to Critical Thinking 101. Where change is a constant. Let's see what we can do about that. Let's take a look at young adults, mature adults, and retirees, just to get a flavor for what that might be. When you're young, you're on multiple learning curves in multiple disciplines, focused on learning economic support leading into your beginning to earn an income, exercising your intellect and your physical prowesses and honing those. You're into experimenting, seeking engaging advisors in your personal development. And you begin to transition from your old family into work, career, and new relationships. There's a lot of challenges in all of this when you're young. Emotions, raging hormones, relying on acculturated views that don't necessarily have factual certainty. You don't really know what you don't know when you start out on this path. And there's a tendency to want to focus in one area at the expense of a full suite of life skills. And it's the beginning of some of your first progress toward happiness and fulfillment. And everybody's circumstances will vary. We're all going to be a bit different in how this occurs. There may well be conflict between competing objectives. In fact, I would predict it's almost absolutely certain. And so it goes. for personal development. So let's see what happens when you're a mature adult. So by the time you're in your 40s, 45-ish or so, you've made certain career choices and personal choices relative to career, family, housing, income, investments, etc. But there's a good likelihood that much of that life plan that you may have, if you have one, is dominated by short-term agendas. This is one of those times when you want to look at where you are, but also where you're headed with the tools that you've built up over time. Your personal development has to contend with competing demands, and this is a hard choice. So it is easy to lose your way without an agreed plan of sufficient duration. It's no longer acceptable simply to have the short-term agenda, I would offer. There's the ability to lose your priorities. I mean, things happen to people, death, divorce, you might move, you might have a career change, you might have joined the wrong company and have to move on to something different. You might wind up stuck, disillusioned, stressed, overloaded, isolated, and unfocused, or just have no stomach for any risk. You might be burned out, really not getting sufficient rest and relaxation, taking care of yourself. And you might lose focus on your personality and your integrity or your authenticity in the process. In other words, other things might be coming before your focus on personal fulfillment. But all things being said, you probably have accumulated some happiness and fulfillment. You're probably interested in more at this point. So one of the things you can do in the near term is simply to go back to the lifelong fulfillment process and refresh your vision, reintegrate the things that you did well, and discard the things that aren't working for you, and reprioritize on the things that really deliver your contentment. So at the retiree level, basically, it's too late to save for your retirement. You're there. This is the reality of being 65 in the United States. It can be the best of times, certainly, but can also be very difficult. Traveling, golf, grandmothering are often not sufficient from a psychological standpoint for personal fulfillment. And retirement really is a time for self-reflection, redefining your personal fulfillment goals and to act on your new vision. It's not about just hanging around until the inevitable. So leading up to senior fulfillment, one can now observe that, between partners, you actually may be growing apart or growing closer together. And some will think this difficult and painful, but in point of fact, as long as we live, and we do live much longer now, it's not unusual that that might happen. It's not unusual to think that there'll be changes in your friend and family relationships as well, and that you might go looking for increased connection and communication with your fellow man. So refocusing and repositioning is really important to this new vision of lifelong fulfillment. So really, the conclusion of this is change is a constant. It's one we may not want to embrace because a lot of us would prefer to find some level of stability and live with it for a while. But change actually is constant. And so to embrace it and try and control it and anticipate it and be resilient around it is a characteristic it's advisable to master. We recommend some voluntary homework at this point. These are pretty easy. These are all podcasts. They're all on YouTube. The Secret of Becoming Mentally Strong by Amy Morin. The Adversity Quotient by Dr. Paul Stoltz, also on YouTube. And Lasting Fulfillment by Martin Seligman, who's the father of positive psychology, can all help illuminate some of these issues for you. So this and much more of everything you'll find at lifelongfulfillment.com. Please avail yourself of the resources located there. And now's the time in our program when we entertain perspectives of point solution experts and people leading self-directed lives. Today we have with us Michelle Dickinson, resilience visionary and workplace coach. She's a TED speaker and also the author of several books, one of which is Breaking Into My Life, Growing Up with a Bipolar Parent, and My Battle to Reclaim Myself. Welcome, Michelle. It's great to have you on Vision in Action Live today.
Thank you for having me.
That's great. So we know you have a lot to share with us, but before we do that, if I've missed anything in your introduction that you'd like to flesh out in terms of your business, your work, your expertise, and so forth, please feel free.
No, you summarized it quite nicely. Thank you.
Well, good. One of the questions I'd like to ask is, there's a lot of dissonance between the workplace and how work is now being conducted, particularly by people who are now solo entrepreneurs. And I'm wondering what you have in terms of an opinion about, is the workplace really ready for personal authenticity? And are they going to allow or even encourage the autonomy that it takes in a knowledge economy to be successful? Got any ideas about that?
Well, to say anything as a blanket statement is kind of hard, right? I think you have to look at
Sure.
individual cultures, right? And as prospective employees, looking at organizations, you really have to do your homework. You have to see if the environment really is conducive for authenticity, if you feel like it would be a comfortable place for you. I think we all have to do our due diligence and our homework before we say yes to any employer. But I will say I'm optimistic coming out of COVID. There is a shift in, the types of cultures that exist, to the innovative organizations that exist. So I think like anything, we have to do our homework.
Right. Well, and I don't think it's going to be a quick fix. It's going to take a while.
For sure.
Old management styles dating from the 1850s, it's going to take a while. So, okay,
Exactly.
so let's move on to your mainstream. Maybe you can tell us about how you regard the role of a resilience coach. What does that mean to all of us?
Sure. So we view resilience as a lifestyle here in my organization. We are from the school of thought that you don't have to wait to hit rock bottom to bounce back. That resilience as a lifestyle is really a way of living and learning strategies, mindsets, behaviors that prepare you to ebb and flow with the inevitable stress that comes at us in life.
Mhm. Okay. And so, what would be some of those common challenges that people might face that would come up?
So there's a lot, right? I've been coaching for several years now. I've logged close to 4,000 hours listening to different people's challenges as they are trying to avoid burnout, avoid, leaving their current profession, many of them.
Hmm.
So like a lot of folks come and they are well aware that their trajectory is burnout. And so we take a really hard look at the way they view adversity and stress and what they actually do for themselves every day. What are their habits and behaviors? And between those two pieces, we're able to work with them to help them prevent burnout ultimately.
Hmm. Hmm. And burnout or being actually stuck, I've come across that kind of concept before. In the things we've seen, we see that people begin to struggle just making decisions about
Oh,
anything.
oh yeah, decision
And
fatigue. Yeah, for sure.
yeah, yeah. Um, do people come to you on their own? Do they get referred? How does that occur in your experience?
Yeah, in most cases, I am on retainer with employers, and employers offered me up to employees who wish to tap into a support like this. So those are those innovative companies, right? The ones that are thinking beyond benefits, thinking how do we better equip our people in the prevention and the preservation of emotional well-being. So these organizations put me on retainer, and then it is voluntary. They do reach out to me. We have sessions together and get them back on track.
I see. Okay. So you must see a lot of different challenges in that activity.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So if I'm sitting here and I know nothing about building a resilience training, where would I start? What do you recommend starting with? Are we going to, you know, deconstruct my lifestyle and then rebuild it? Is that the way this goes?
I think we have to take a look at what you think and what you do. We are what we repeatedly think, and we are what we repeatedly do. Those are the two levers. Those are the two real core areas we can look at and create change.
Right. So I'm going to be working on some habits, it sounds like.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the average person gets in very little movement. The average person doesn't take enough downtime for themselves to thoroughly rejuvenate and feel better so they can come back with a clear head and able to perform to their best ability. The average person doesn't get enough rest, honestly. And so they're at a disadvantage when they are confronted with stress if they haven't gotten the rest that their body needs. So a lot of pieces to this puzzle.
Mhm. Okay. Is this kind of a process? I'm sure since you're consulting for the individual, it's individualized, but is there a certain kind of process that you like to follow? Is that in your books? Or do you have that as a workbook? Is that how people get to engage this?
So my main book is a memoir about growing up with my mom who was bipolar. It's in essence my own resilience story.
Mhm.
Um, I am in the process of finalizing an ebook around resilience that provides a resilience roadmap. And many of the things that we do when I meet with clients is we go through my audit. We have a very comprehensive resilience audit where review we review different people's experiences and their habits.
I see. Okay. So we can get some metrics about what I'm doing today anyway. Well, that's,
Absolutely. Mhm.
yeah. Um, and what are the key points of maybe avoiding this burnout syndrome that, I might be at risk for? What
I
should
think,
I be
yeah,
doing?
yeah. Well, I think, the first thing is you have to look at how you view self-care. The average person views self-care as something they get to if they have time. And my invitation to your audience is don't wait for there to be time. You don't have that luxury because compounded stress is really what gets us in trouble.
Mhm.
So shift your relationship to self-care, shift your relationship to adequate rest, adequate movement, hydration, good diet, connection with loved ones. All of those things are so critical. So when you start to shift that perspective that self-care is actually should become a non-negotiable, and you start giving your body and your mind what it needs, you'll start to feel better.
Mhm. Okay. Um, it occurs to me that, that's a question of balance, in another vernacular, and that, balance is a tough thing to achieve, whether I'm balancing, career, family, my own personal responsibility, keeping myself whole. Um, that I think is a pretty large challenge all around. Um,
Well, if you could take a step back for a second and recognize the impact of not taking care of yourself,
right,
who's the person in your life that gets the short end of that stick? So if you could really understand the true impact of not finding balance, it's
right,
going to be your loved ones that don't get a good version of you.
right. Yeah. Sounds like the family or whatever relationships you have with other people, they also have to be aware of you doing this and the results of that. If you're rebalancing your life, it's going to cut into or improve necessarily maybe some of the things that you do with them.
But yeah. Mhm.
So, if you're one of a family, do you have to rebalance the whole family to get the individual balanced?
I think you have to start with yourself no matter what.
Okay.
Start with yourself, start modeling that for the people around you, start feeling good, start emitting a better energy. They'll pick up on that. They'll be curious organically, want to know what you're doing.
Oh, that's good. Um, so you were a speaker for TED, I understand. Was this the subject, the resilience, the subject of your TED Talk?
No, my backstory is that I grew up with a mom who had bipolar disorder. And
Right?
I was invited to tell that story on the TED stage. And so
Right?
I told the story about my mom. And, whenever you have a loved one that has a mental illness, the entire family unit is affected. So I told the story about my mom, and that inspired me to go on and write my memoir about, loving and caring for someone with a mental illness, which led me to become a mental health advocate, which then had me take a step back and say, why are we talking about mental illness after the fact? Why are we not getting ahead of it and talking about ways we can preserve our emotional well-being so we are not vulnerable for these types of struggles and burnout and depression.
Hmm.
So that's when my resilience practice was born and my resilience as a lifestyle brand was born.
I see. Well, great. That's great to take. It's difficult, I'm sorry, from a personal standpoint, but
Sure.
it's great that you can derive that benefit from it and offer it to your clientele.
Right.
That's, yeah. Uh, One of the things I wanted to ask you is, obviously I sent you some materials about lifelong fulfillment and how that fits in. We tend to view resilience as one of the key components, like many other key components that fit into a full lifestyle plan. Do you find people coming to you have those sorts of things, or are they so stressed that, the plan has kind of gone out the window, so to speak?
Plan for most people is a luxury. What you speak of, it's more of I have to just hold the family together, hold a job together, hold my finances together. And how do I do that and keep a smile on my face?
Right.
Right. So, yeah.
Sounds like it's, you know, in the region of being crisis work as
Yeah.
opposed to something planned and methodical, right?
A
Yeah.
lot of people come to me when they're on the verge of quitting their jobs, on the verge of leaving their profession, and say to me, "You're going to help me leave." And I say, "Hang on, you're going to take a step back and we're going to
Right.
rebalance you so you have a clear head and you can really stop, take a pause and say, what is it that I really want to do? What brings me joy? What brings me fulfillment?" And most of the time, it's the work they're doing. And it's just that they don't have a lot of control around the other aspects of their life. So the work feels like it is the problem.
Right. Right. And so it sounds like you help them discover really what the problem is, whether it's work or in personal life or other things, so that they don't make a precipitous mistaken movement, right?
Exactly. Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. Uh, is any part of this also physical? I mean, are they allowed sabbaticals? Do they take vacations? Do they, within a work environment, those are typically kind of hard to come by,
Yeah.
unless you plan ahead.
Mhm.
But if you're in crisis, it would seem like it's in the business's best interest or the institution's best interest for these people to get the help they need, the time off,
Mhm.
uh, to reposition their thoughts, their attitudes, and so forth. Is
Mhm.
is that in evidence, or is that a struggle too?
Yeah, so I think, it's a nice idea to be able to have a vacation or a staycation and disconnect. I think that's a great idea, but in essence, my practice is all about helping them integrate daily self-care because we have vacations that may come few and far between. And so to sort of couch everything for that. We want them more so to understand every single day there should be a piece of that dedicated to you and to learn how that feeds and fuels you every day. And that vacation is kind of like the cherry on the sundae if you've been, recalibrated and figure out like, okay, I know I need to take like this hour for me, or I need to start my
Mhm.
day this way. I already feel better. So yeah, we like
Yeah.
to start there.
Well, as in your experience with the clientele you're exposed to, is it, management, middle management, workers, is it all up and down the
It
organization?
is. It
Really?
is like, yeah, I've had people from all levels. It's not just that person that is, you know, the lower level employee. We're talking directors and above that struggle with balance. Um, so yeah, it's the whole gamut.
In your opinion, are the institutions and businesses aware, you know, uh, cognizant of the fact that this is so pervasive?
I think so because they're thinking differently. They're providing resources like my coaching. They are recognizing that what they currently are doing may not be enough. So yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I wanted to ask you if you had any closing comments that you'd like to share with our audience, any comments on the concept of lifelong fulfillment, if you like. Um, they would want to make sure you have that opportunity.
Thank you for asking. I would say, like, the number one thing, if I could recommend anything for someone who's just trying to feel a little bit better, is start your day off with a little bit of ease and grace. So don't fall into your day. The number one thing I see with my clients is there's no intentionality with how people start their day, and the rest of the day is like a domino effect. So if you start your day off with high cortisol and complete stress in the morning, you are setting yourself up to have a very challenging experience. So if you could set aside 10 to 15 minutes just for yourself in the morning, every morning, to just maybe have a cup of coffee, a cup of tea, do some reflection, set some intentions for your day, and then ease into your day, it's probably going to create a better daily experience, and days turn into weeks and weeks turn into months.
Good point of advice. I like the coffee idea a lot.
Yeah, why not? It might mean you have to get up 10 minutes early. Well, go to bed 10 minutes early.
Right. So, Michelle, if any of the audience wanted to reach out and learn more, do you have websites or contact points that you want them to be able to reach?
My website is currently under a complete overhaul. So my website's not available, but my second home is LinkedIn. So I highly recommend that people connect with me on LinkedIn. I
Okay,
frequently push out resilience strategies and tips and information there. So feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn.
that's great. Well, listen, thank you, Michelle, for joining us in Vision in Action Live today. It's been wonderful getting some of your insights on this issue of resilience.
Thank you for having me.
You bet. We'll see you again.